Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a really unsettling event, one that still sparks a lot of debate. The 2001 massacre of the Nepalese royal family. You know, the Durbar Hachakanda, the story most people know, the widely accepted one, points to Crown Prince Dipendra, sole perpetrator.
Right.
But that story, well, the more you dig into it, the more it seems to unravel a bit.
Exactly. And that's really our goal in this deep dive, isn't it? To take apart that official account using the material you've shared with us.
Yeah.
We want to look at the inconsistencies, explore the alternative ideas that have come up. You're looking for, a quick way to get a thorough understanding.
A shortcut, basically.
Yeah, a shortcut through all the complexity.
Yeah.
And that's what we're aiming for, a clear path through this tragedy.
It's strange thinking back to how quickly the world reacted. That official story just spread like wildfire internationally. Very graphic picture painted.
It did.
But, and this is a key thing, I think, it contrasts so sharply with the Nepali media. They were silent for quite a while.
Yeah, that delay is significant.
Makes you wonder, doesn't it, about who was shaping that initial story?
Well, the speed difference is stark. You had outlets like the BBC, CNN, reporting Dipendra as the lone gunman almost immediately. But Nepali news, a 16-hour delay, roughly. That immediate framing from outside, it does raise questions, about potential information control, maybe, right from the start.
Was a narrative being set before the local picture could even emerge?
Possibly.
It really makes you think about how powerful a story can be once it takes hold quickly. The source material we looked at even mentions the idea of a big lie. Repeat something often enough, even a falsehood, and it starts to feel like the truth.
And you see that reinforced later, don't you?
How so?
Well, in the documentaries, the films that came out afterwards, they often leaned heavily on that image of Dipendra enraged, obsessed over this relationship.
And focusing on the emotional drama.
Exactly. Kind of cementing that official story in people's minds, sometimes maybe without all the factual backup fully examined.
Okay, so let's get into the details of that official narrative then. What exactly is the story that was put out?
Right. So the official line is, Crown Prince Dipendra, supposedly drunk, maybe on drugs, furious because his family wouldn't approve his relationship with Devyani Rana. He takes an automatic weapon, goes into the billiard hall at Tribhuvan Sadan, the palace building, and murders King Birendra, the queen, and several other family members. 9 others, I think. And then supposedly he turns the gun on himself, shoots himself. That's the core narrative.
Okay. And the investigation that followed, that must have been complex.
You'd think so. But here's the first thing that raises eyebrows. It was led by the Chief Justice, Keshav Prasad Upadhyay, but the speed. It was remarkably fast.
How fast?
It was formed on Jesta 26, which is May 26, 2001. The report, 139 pages, was delivered by Jesta 32. That's June 2nd.
Wow, that's, a week for something like this?
Exactly. A week to investigate a royal massacre. It does make you question the thoroughness, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And digging deeper, the credibility seems even shakier. There are allegations, right, about suppressing forensic evidence.
Yes, that's a major point in the source material. Reports that orders were given not to do proper post-mortem exams at the military hospital.
But that's crucial. You wouldn't get details on bullet trajectories or toxicology reports on the victims?
Precisely. By skipping those standard procedures, you're basically closing off key ways to verify what happened, who might have been involved.
It restricts any independent verification.
Totally. It's like, what were they trying not to find? That's the question it raises.
And then there's the weapon itself, the alleged murder weapon.
Ah, yes. The committee, the investigation committee, actually admitted the gun was handled without gloves.
Without gloves? That's basic evidence handling 101, surely.
Yeah.
You'd wipe off any prints.
It's a fundamental error. So was it just massive incompetence or, something more deliberate to muddy the waters around fingerprints?
When the United States takes
And access was tight too, wasn't it?
Very tightly controlled. Palace gate sealed. Media couldn't get near the hospital. Chani Hospital, even the Prime Minister, reportedly wasn't told for 2 hours after it happened.
2 hours. That level of control over information right after the event. It feels unusual, like a lockdown.
It's definitely a red flag, as you say. And the source material also mentions how the committee acted during their press conference.
How so?
Apparently quite dismissive, treated journalists with disdain, avoided the tough questions.
What sort of questions?
Key things like, what about King Gyanendra? He survived. What about his son, Paras Shah? also survived. What was the military's role in all of this? They apparently just wouldn't address those points properly.
So a lack of transparency right from the investigation itself.
It definitely looks that way. It fuels the idea that maybe the goal wasn't a deep search for truth, but more about, well, confirming a story quickly. It certainly fed public suspicion early on.
Okay, let's talk timeline. Because the official story packs everything into a very short window.
Yeah, this is another really tricky part. The official narrative basically says the whole massacre happened between Dipendra's last phone call to Devyani Rana,
Which was when?
around 8:39 p.m., according to the records, and the time the deaths were declared, around 9:15 p.m.
So that's 36 minutes.
36 minutes. For one person to supposedly kill multiple people in different parts of the palace and then shoot himself.
That sounds incredibly tight. Almost impossible physically.
It does seem implausible, right? Could one person, even if they were, impaired as claimed, realistically do all that in different locations in just over half an hour?
And didn't some witnesses say something different about the bodies?
Yes. The source material mentions eyewitness accounts, people at the hospital, describing bodies arriving that were already severely mutilated. That might suggest the shootings actually happened earlier than that 8:39 p.m. start time.
Okay, so the timeline is shaky. What about the claim that Dipendra was intoxicated? That's central to the motive, isn't it?
It absolutely is. The story paints him as heavily influenced by drink and drugs, acting out of rage, but the limited forensic evidence we do have seems to contradict that.
How?
Analysis of cigarette butts found near him, and reportedly even analysis of his brain tissue showed no traces of alcohol or drug.
No traces. So he wasn't actually intoxicated.
According to that evidence, no. Which is, well, pretty striking, isn't it? If he wasn't intoxicated, a main pillar of the official story, the reason why he supposedly snapped, starts to crumble.
Definitely. And wasn't there something about the self-inflicted wound too?
Yes.
Yeah.
The angle of the bullet wound in his head and where the pistol was found near him. Some forensic experts have apparently questioned whether it was even physically possible for him to have shot himself in the way described.
Adding to that, the source material notes his own aides described him quite differently, didn't they?
They did. Consistently described him as pretty level-headed, balanced, which makes this sudden, impulsive explosion of violence seem even more unlikely, out of character, perhaps.
So the motive is questioned by the lack of intoxication evidence, his character descriptions, and the physical act itself might be questionable.
Yeah, the whole picture painted by the official narrative starts to look quite shaky when you examine these points.
Then there's the physical scene itself, the palace, Tribhuvan Sedan.
Right. And a crucial point here is that the building, the actual site of the alleged massacre, was demolished.
Demolished.
When, after Gyanendra became king, it was torn down and rebuilt. Which means potential evidence was destroyed. Any chance for future independent forensic analysis of that specific scene, gone.
That seems convenient, perhaps, for anyone wanting to prevent further scrutiny.
It certainly raises concerns about evidence erasure, whether intentional or not. Demolishing a major crime scene so soon afterwards is highly unusual.
There were other odd physical details mentioned too. Bullet marks.
Yes, reports of bullet marks found on a statue pedestal in the palace garden.
Okay.
And these marks apparently suggested shots fired from low down, like ground level or maybe even a trench.
Which wouldn't fit the story of Dipendra firing from, say, inside the building or standing up.
Exactly. It doesn't quite align with him being the lone, elevated shooter. And another small detail, Dipendra was reportedly found near a pond after supposedly shooting himself.
Right.
But there was no mention of his clothes being wet. You'd expect maybe some sign if he'd been near water.
These little things. They don't prove anything on their own, maybe, but they add up, don't they? Start painting a different potential picture.
They really do. When you take them together, these discrepancies hint at a scenario that could be quite different from the official one, maybe multiple shooters. A staged scene. It opens up possibilities.
Which leads us, I suppose, inevitably to the idea of alternative explanations. Conspiracy theories, even.
It does, and the source material brings up some pretty serious ones, including potential involvement of foreign intelligence agencies.
Like who?
The CIA is mentioned, and also India's agency, RAW, the Research and Analysis Wing.
Based on what?
Well, it cites Wayne Madsen, who's described as a former U.S. Army officer. He apparently made claims about CIA and RAW involvement in an article. And adding fuel to that, there's the reported detail that the CIA actually set up an office inside Jayanendra's compound just months before the massacre happened.
Okay, the timing there is, Well, it's certainly interesting. It feeds speculation, doesn't it, about external factors?
It undeniably does.
And weren't there eyewitness accounts suggesting something else entirely?
Yes, quite dramatically different accounts. Someone named Lal Bahadur Lamteri Magar described as a former palace soldier.
What did he claim?
He claimed he actually saw masked individuals disguised to look like Dipendra carrying out a coordinated attack.
Masked attackers disguised as the prince.
That's the claim. And according to this account, the real Dipendra was shot somewhere else entirely, and then his body was dressed to fit the story, to frame him.
Wow, that's a completely different scenario, a deliberate setup.
It suggests a much more organized, sinister plot, doesn't it, than just one person snapping. Multiple attackers, impersonation. That points to a well-planned operation.
Were there attempts to silence people telling different stories?
It seems so. The source material mentions reports of witness intimidation, people being pressured, basically, to stop them contradicting the official version.
So active efforts to control the narrative.
That's what's suggested, which again makes you wonder why someone would feel the need to suppress other accounts so forcefully.
And then there's the unavoidable point. King Gyanendra, Birendra's brother.
Right. His incredibly convenient absence from that specific banquet, along with his immediate family.
They survived unscathed.
They did. And Gyanendra, of course, then became king. That survival and direct benefit has always fueled suspicion about his possible role.
And the official investigation didn't really look into him.
Apparently not in any serious depth. The report seems to have largely sidestepped scrutinizing his role, or the role of those who directly benefited. Which is quite telling, many would say.
Especially given the political context.
Exactly. Gyanendra was known to be more conservative, maybe more traditionalist, compared to King Birendra, who was seen as more progressive.
Right. Which brings us to the broader political situation in Nepal back then. It wasn't exactly stable, was it?
No, definitely not. You had ongoing tensions between the monarchy, the military, the government, and also the Maoist insurgency was active.
And King Birendra was making moves towards, what, constitutional reforms?
Yes, steps that might have been seen as a threat by some powerful groups, vested interests, perhaps both inside Nepal and maybe even internationally.
Whereas Gyanendra represented a different approach.
A more conservative stance, yes. A potential shift in power dynamics that some might have preferred. And the source material also throws in another detail. The presence of U.S. troops in Nepal on the very day of the massacre.
Really? Why?
Apparently for a building inauguration ceremony. Just another layer of complexity, another detail floating around the events of that day.
It's also interesting what happened later, or rather, what didn't happen.
Meaning?
Well, there was huge public demand for a proper reinvestigation, right? Especially after the monarchy was abolished in 2008.
A lot of people wanted answers.
But leaders like Prachanda, the Maoist leader who became prime minister multiple times, they never actually initiated a new inquiry, despite the public pressure.
That's true. The calls for reopening the case largely went unanswered by successive governments.
And the source material connects this timing to U.S.-Nepal military collaborations that were happening around then.
Yeah, it points to that connection, this lack of action, despite public feeling and so many lingering doubts. It does raise questions about whether there were, or maybe still are, external influences affecting the situation.
It certainly suggests some forces might prefer the issue remain closed.
That's one interpretation, yes.
Given everything we've discussed, the flaws, the lack of transparency, it's no surprise there was public outrage at the time.
Absolutely. Widespread anger, protests against the monarchy, people clearly felt they weren't getting the truth.
And you could argue that the whole handling of this, the manipulation of the story, really damaged the monarchy's standing.
Profoundly. That erosion of public trust, the feeling of a cover-up, it was definitely a major factor leading to the monarchy finally being abolished in 2008.
So the way the narrative was managed or mismanaged had huge long-term consequences for Nepal's entire political system.
Without a doubt. It wasn't just about solving a crime. It fundamentally shifted the country's trajectory.
Yeah. We should probably touch on the counter-arguments.
Yeah.
People who support the official story.
Of course. It's important to acknowledge this.
One main point is simply motive. Dipendra's frustration over the marriage issue combined with the alleged intoxication. It provides a reason, however extreme.
It does offer a motive, yes. But as we've seen, the evidence for that intoxication is weak, contradicted by forensic findings. And eyewitness accounts of his behavior earlier that evening don't necessarily paint a picture of someone about to commit mass murder. Plus, is romantic frustration, even intense frustration, really enough to explain the scale of violence? It feels maybe overly simplistic to some.
And there's still the lack of solid eyewitness accounts confirming he shot everyone in that billiard hall.
Exactly. Key details remain unverified.
Okay, what about the argument that, well, maybe Nepal just didn't have great forensic capabilities back then?
Yeah.
That the investigation flaws were due to lack of resources, not conspiracy.
That's sometimes raised, yes. And resource limitations might explain some minor oversights, perhaps. But it doesn't really explain actively suppressing autopsies, does it? Or the specific admitted mishandling of the alleged murder weapon. Those actions seem to go beyond simple incompetence or lack of capability.
They suggest something more deliberate.
They strongly suggest a deliberate effort to control the evidence and, by extension, the narrative and the investigation's findings. It points more towards intent than just limitation.
So wrapping this up, this deep dive, it seems pretty clear that the official story of the Durbar Hachikanda is, well, highly questionable, at the very least.
Absolutely. The number of inconsistencies in the investigation itself, the forensic evidence that contradicts key parts of the narrative, these persistent alternative accounts, it all points to a situation where the accepted truth is built on very shaky foundations.
The sheer volume of evidence that seems to run counter to the official line is quite striking, isn't it?
It really is. What stands out are the unanswered questions, that implausible timeline, the missing proof of intoxication, those odd bullet marks, the demolition of the crime scene.
Just so many loose ends.
Exactly. It leaves things deeply unresolved.
Which leaves us, and leaves you, the listener, with a pretty significant thought to ponder, I think. What does it mean for a country, for its history, if a foundational event like this might be based on a narrative that was manipulated? You have to ask, who really benefited from what happened that night? And why might the full truth have been suppressed so aggressively and for so long?
It's a profound question, definitely. Lots to think about there.
It certainly is. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
सम्बोधन